Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope that the birds are singing, and I hope that the wind is at your back. Got a great show for you guys today. Let me just pose this question to everybody within the sound of my voice. What happens when an aspiring actor trades the bright lights of Hollywood for the shadowy underworld of corporate espionage? Meet Robert Kerbeck, a man who has lived two extraordinary lives, one on stage and one in the high stakes world of deception. Robert's gripping memoir, Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street, published by Penguin Random House, is a true crime thriller that takes you behind the scenes of America's most powerful corporations. In Ruse, Robert reveals how he became the world's greatest corporate spy, using social engineering or rusing to infiltrate the very heart of corporate power. Even Frank Abagnale, the legendary con artist of Catch Me If You Can, praises Robert for elevating the art of the con to new heights, while Shondaland hails Ruse as a story almost too good to be true. From mingling with Hollywood elites to working with O.J. Simpson just weeks before his infamous car chase, Robert's life is a whirlwind of ambition, deception, and reinvention. Today, we dive into the mind of the man who's lived on both sides of the American dream, from the glitz of Hollywood to the hidden world of corporate espionage. Robert Kerbeck's story will leave you questioning the thin line between truth and lies, ambition and morality. This conversation is going to be fun. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. Robert, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing great, especially after that lovely introduction. Thank you. My goodness.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. You got a brand new book out, and you've lived an incredible life. And in that life, you've gained some really incredible life experience, man. And I want to get into it today, but I thought I'd maybe let you paint a little bit more background, a little back. How are you now? How is it kind of, maybe you could just flesh out the background a little bit more on how you got to be where you are today.
Well, I think to do that, you got to go back to the beginning, right? And,
Right.
My hometown is Philadelphia. My great grandfather sold horse carriages before automobiles were invented. And he saw the writing on the wall, and he switched and became one of the first car dealers in Philadelphia. My grandfather took over that dealership. My father took over that dealership, and I was supposed to take over that dealership. But of course, I fell in love with acting when I was in college. And my father was very disappointed in me, especially when I moved to New York to pursue acting. And of course, actors need survival jobs. And I was a terrible waiter. I tried it. I was an even worse bartender. Eventually I needed a job. I only had one friend in New York, and he mentioned this job one day, and then he shut up right away, like he'd been told, don't talk about this, don't tell anybody about this. And I said, whoa, dude, I'm broke. I need a job. Help me out. And so he very reluctantly got me an interview. And it was with this woman that had this small corporate spying firm, which of course I didn't know at the time. And I go to her place to do an interview. She's got a doorman building, Upper East Side. I'm living in a small cave in Hell's Kitchen. And so right away, when I got to the building and I went up to the penthouse, I knew, whatever she was doing, it was lucrative. And then she opened her apartment, and it was the nicest apartment I'd ever been into. I mean, apartment doesn't even do it justice. And so I knew whatever she was doing, she was making a ton of money. And I have a very strange interview. She never asked me any questions about myself. She never tells me a thing about the job, sends me on my way. I figure I blew it. My buddy calls and he says, you got the job, but don't get too excited because no one is able to do this job. And the very next day I got sent out to Brooklyn, to the home or the apartment of this woman who was the trainer for the woman that ran the corporate spying firm. And that was when I began to learn that what we've been hired to do was infiltrate corporations and get people to tell us things that they should never in a million years tell us.
Man, it's like it's so closely tied to the foundation of a Hollywood movie, man. And I could see how those two things are related. Like at that point in time, were you just blown? Like, you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to do what? Like, what was the relationship? Like, what's going on in your mind? Were you like, oh, this is kind of like acting, or what was going on in your mind at that point in time?
Great question. So when I first get to this woman's apartment, first of all, I walk into the apartment in Brooklyn, and there's a bathtub in the living room, and And then the woman, who was quite attractive, says, "Come on in. You'll work in my bedroom." And I had no idea what the job was. I
Right.
was single though, so I was like, "Well, okay, let's see
Okay.
where this is going to go." And so I go into her bedroom, and there are only two pieces of furniture in the room: a futon on the ground and a desk. And she says, "Sit down at the desk." And she begins to tell me what we do, and then of course I'm very confused. And so she picks up the phone and makes a phone call to a major Wall Street firm, and she puts on an Irish accent, and she concocts this whole crazy story which seemed ludicrous to me, and yet she got the assistant of a major executive to release all of this private information to her, which then she in turn gave to the woman who ran the firm, who then sells that information to that company's rival.
Wow.
And when I heard her do this phone call, one of the things about corporate spying is, we all know the Russians spy on the Chinese spy on us. But what most people have no idea is that, and somebody asked me that the other day, they say, "Robert, do most companies in America hire spies?" I said, "No, most companies don't. All companies do. All companies in America globally hire spies." Now, they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to advertise that. And of course, they do it. They hire intermediary firms because they don't want to get, in trouble. They don't want to get caught. So if Robert gets caught spying, they can say, "Well, we didn't hire Robert. This consulting firm hired Robert, or this executive recruiting firm hired Robert. We had no idea." But I'm here to tell you that I have, over the years, presented my, extracted data. I've personally presented it to individuals that today are the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world.
That sounds dangerous to me. It sounds like that information could be sold not only to rivals, but like corporate security fraud and lawyers and attorneys, man. Like that sounds like a pretty dicey situation to be into, man.
Yeah.
So after the first phone call, this attractive woman puts on an Irish accent. Are you like, whoa, this girl's pretty talented? Or like, what were you thinking? Like, I could do this, or like, I can't do this. What was going through your mind then?
Well, and that's a great question, because I think there was, as much as I was like, whoa, this
Right.
is a little questionable, there was also a part of me as the actor going, well, I could do an accent, maybe my Irish won't be as good as hers, but
Right.
this is Manfred calling from the office in Germany. We have the European Union regulators here, and we need some information from the States. Yeah. I'm like, I could do some accents. And so there was part of it that was challenging as a young actor. And by the way, when we started doing this job, we were getting $8 an hour, right? $8 an hour, which is hilarious, because
Right.
for your listeners out there, I took that $8 an hour job, and by the end was making $2 million a year as a corporate spy.
Do you remember your first gig?
My first spying gig? Yeah. This is insane. We were hired to infiltrate defense companies and get people that were handling top secret weapons programs and get information about those firms, those programs, who was in charge of them, what they did. Now, what's insane was we were getting that information to sell to their rivals, which was another American defense contracting firm, right?
Right.
But if I'd been hired to do that and get that information for Russia or China, let's say, I could have gone to jail for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Or been
And we
killed.
were,
Like I
and
can
we were
imagine
getting
people don't
$8
want
an
that
hour.
out.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing to
when
me.
when you're young, you're not that smart, right?
Yeah, but you have I think that's where ambition comes in, right? Like at some
Yeah.
point in time when you're young, you're like, you know what? This knucklehead, I'm better than that guy. I can crush this guy. Watch this, and I got to think that there is some sort of more than adrenaline, but ego involved in it too. Like I can beat this guy, or I can beat this woman. At least that's how I think. I don't know what that says
Yes.
about me, but I'm like, yeah, I can outsmart this guy. Was there any of that going on in your mind?
Absolutely. And and I'm a competitive guy, so there was like, what, I'm going to get this information. And
Right.
my buddy who got the job, in the book, his name is Pax. Pax had gotten the job like 2 months ahead of me, and so we were very competitive with
Right.
each other.
Right.
And I would develop what we would call a ruse or a ploy, which is just how are we going to get this information? And I would develop one, and he would hear me on the phone, let's say, doing this ploy to get this information, and then he would copy it, and then I would hear him doing something, and I would steal his thing, and and so we were constantly like trying to one up each other to see who could get the most information. And in the beginning, we were getting a lot of kind of basic information that today theoretically is on LinkedIn, right? We would learn the company's organizational chart, right? And who ran teams and what they did. And back in the day before LinkedIn, LinkedIn really didn't explode until after the financial crash in 2008. So LinkedIn really didn't start to take off until really about 2010. So, 14 years ago, right? But before that, there was no way for companies to know who was at a firm, what they did, what they got paid. Were they a rock star? Which LinkedIn still can't tell you, right? I mean, when people would go for an interview, let's say you were a salesperson and you'd go for an interview, what are you going to tell the person you're interviewing with? Are you going to say you're a bad salesperson? No, you're going to say you're the best salesperson. You're one of the top salespeople at this firm. And what we learned is we could get the production numbers of sales teams at any company in the world. So we could tell you who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, with the actual statistics, with their revenue, with their sales numbers. Well, think about how valuable that is to a rival corporation. If you can poach, if you can steal the top salesperson from your rival, or the number two salesperson from your rival, and then we would combine that revenue information with how much these people were getting paid. We would get their salaries. And so you'd see, oh, salesperson number one, boy, they make good money. Salesperson two, oh, they make good money. Salesperson number three, oh, wait a second. They're a young, up and coming future star. They're underpaid. We're going to steal that person. We're going to give them a big bump in their salary. They're going to leave this company. Yeah. And now we just stole a rock star from our big rival. And at the end of the day, companies are about people. They're about the talent that you have. I always go back to football. I'm a big football fan. And remember when the New England Patriots lost Tom Brady and he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, what happened? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers won a Super Bowl, right? Because they stole Tom Brady. I mean, he's a free agent, so it's a little different. But that's the same thing in corporate America. And that was one of the things in the early days pre-LinkedIn, that was kind of a lot of the information we were getting was who are the top people, so our clients could steal them.
Man, it blows my mind. What does that say, in your opinion, about corporations and the American dream? I know it's kind of a big question, but like, am I romanticizing the idea that like your grandfather sold these horse and carriages and they moved up to this next level, and like, am I just romanticizing the history, thinking that like maybe we used to be a place that cared about our people and we were working together, even though competing, to try to become the best as shared goals and shared sacrifice, where now it just seems so cutthroat? Am I just romanticizing a past that was never there?
Yes.
I knew it.
I mean, we know how cutthroat sports are, right? You see coaches, getting fired in mid-season and their record maybe isn't even that bad. And we see things like that all the time. Corporate America is that on steroids, right? And sometimes people don't think that, and corporations try to sell us on this idea that they have a culture of this and the ethics of that and the morality of that. And it's hilarious when I see CEOs or major executives on CNBC talking about company culture and company morals, that I presented my stolen data directly to them.
That is hilarious.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Like I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about like the psychology of deception. In your memoir, you describe becoming one of the world's greatest corporate spies. And at what point do you think deception became a survival mechanism, or did it become a survival mechanism for you?
Look, I think when you're poor, and I started out as, a poor guy, I paid for college myself. I lived on Kraft macaroni and cheese, 3 for 99 cents. So when you're poor, you it's kind of like, by any means necessary, you've got to
Right.
survive, and,
Yeah.
and so when I took the job, even though I knew it was, morally dubious, and actually at one point, my buddy Pax and I, we hired an attorney because, we were young people and we didn't want to go to jail. And we asked the attorney, we said, look, is this illegal? And the attorney he said, it's in the gray, the very
Mm,
dark gray.
mm,
Right. And so we really tried to proceed with caution.
yeah.
Um, Later, we got into some serious trouble, and I don't want to spoil anything if your
Right.
audience,
Right.
but we at one point we were being chased and hunted by a number of authorities with three initials in their names, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you know, but I think as a young person, when you're poor, you kind of you're doing what you got to do to survive. And deception for me, fortunately, unfortunately, was part of that.
It's interesting that the word deception has a lot of negative connotations to it, but you could easily change out the word deception with, you know, persuasion or
Yeah.
manipulation on some level, and I'm curious, like how let's talk about dual identities for a little bit. Like in the world of acting, which you've spent a lot of time doing acting and meeting with people, you have to become the character. If you're Daniel Day-Lewis, you walk around in that character for like a
Yeah.
month or something like that. The same must be true if you're going to ruse somebody at a company. Like I'm sure you got to do lots of research. You have to figure out the person you're talking to on some level. Okay, is this person, do they have a profile? Can you walk us through that? Like how do you prepare to be in that position? Do you do research? Do you check out the people? What's that look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that a lot of people, they had this conception that, we would, because in the beginning we did go in person to do some of this rusing. We would go
Right,
to a bar where we knew certain bankers hung out, or we went
right,
to sports events, and we would go to some of these things. But what we quickly found out was, as actors, that we could use the anonymity of the good old fashioned phone call to get people
right,
to tell us stuff that they would never tell us in person, right? And of course, we would impersonate um, real people at companies, and we would impersonate executives at companies,
ah,
right? So I would see someone on CNBC, and he'd go, "Yeah, this is Bill Jones, and I'm the senior vice president of," and I would hear that voice, and I'd go, "Well, I could do that voice." Right? And then I would call someone up and go, "Hey, it's da da da," blah, blah, and
right,
then the person on the other end of the phone, and of course, a lot of times I would target the person on the other end of the phone, so I knew that they would be levels below the person I was pretending to be,
right,
but that they would recognize the name, but they very unlikely ever had any direct contact with this person, so that they would go, "Whoa, I've got this major executive on the phone. Wow, I want to get in good with the executive, so I'm going to be a team player because that's what we're taught in corporate America, and I'm
right,
going to help them out as much as possible." And so now I've got this person on the phone who believes I'm this executive. They want to curry favor. So they're going to help me and they're going to give me information. And even more, they're going to give me whatever I want to know. So obviously, they have access to their internal directory, they have access to their internet. They can tell me anything I want to know. If it's corporate information for my clients, or if I'm a hacker, they're going to tell me the
yeah,
architecture of their systems and how their systems are set up, which is going to make it easier for me. Or if I'm selling that information to a hacking organization, it's going to make it easier for that firm to get penetrated. Now, I never was getting information for hacking purposes,
right,
but it's the same exact thing. And we'll segue a little bit
yeah,
into a very interesting topic, which is ransomware attacks, right?
perfect,
Which are proliferating and costing companies millions and millions and millions of dollars, which they don't even publicize or announce because
yep,
it's so embarrassing for their reputation, right? About a year ago, there was a major hack of MGM in Las Vegas. The elevators didn't work, right? People couldn't get into their hotel rooms because MGM had been told to pay a ransom. They said, no, we won't pay the ransom. And the hackers shut down a casino in Las Vegas.
Ooh.
And that hack started with a social engineering or ruse phone call. Just like I described, you get someone on the phone, you pretend to be an executive, and you get them to give you information, help you reset a password, explain, and so most of the hacks, just like corporate spying, start with a social engineering phone call.
It's amazing to me. Like on some level, we see these large corporations and they build themselves as these impenetrable forces. We've been around for 200 years, but on some level, they're so vulnerable. It kind
Yeah.
of speaks to the human condition on some level.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people all the time, 45 minutes. Give me 45 minutes. I can find out pretty much anything I want to know about your company.
It's interesting that you bring up ransomware. Like it's so prolific. Like it happens all the time, and so many of these outages that you see. Oh, we're just down for a little bit. You can probably bet there was a hack that happened right there. And
Absolutely, and and it's scary too. There was a hospital was recently hacked, and the hospital was shut down, and the doctors and nurses are going back to writing things on paper. So you think about how dangerous that is. And so that's one of the things that I try to speak to now when I'm on programs like yours and when firms call me for consulting is, you need to train your people. You need to train your employees that there are people out there that are using the good old fashioned phone call to get the information that they then use to hack the system, right? And so if you're not training your employees, if you're not preparing them for these kind of situations, then it's not surprising then when companies get hacked and when companies get ransomware attacks and when companies' operations get shut down by hackers. And so I really now, I kind of went from, in the old days, I was on the offense. Now I'm on the defense, right? Now I'm trying to help firms, help corporations, especially to prevent that kind of activity.
I'm glad you're doing that. It's fascinating to think about how big corporations are now too. It's almost like an unfair advantage for like a multinational corporation that's so huge. Like the right hand has no idea what the left hand's even doing, right?
Yep. And we utilize that to our advantage. So, for example, I did the German accent earlier, right? So I would be like, yeah, this is Manfred in the Frankfurt office, right? And I'd be calling someone in Dublin, or I'd be calling someone in Tokyo, or I'd be calling someone in Chicago, right? And so they would look me up and they would go, oh yeah, Manfred runs legal for Germany, or he runs compliance for Europe. Oh, boy, it's a little odd he's asking me for what he's asking me, but he's the head of compliance for Europe. There's got to be a legitimate reason. And he's very funny. That accent is making me laugh. And he's on the same team. And so they tell you these things, even though there's a warning sign flashing somewhere in their head, right? And that's what you talked about persuasion.
Yes.
And one of the things is when you're a spy, when you're a hacker in these situations, is you are always introducing the element of the ticking clock, right? So I need this information, now. I have to have it now. We have an emergency. We're meeting with the regulators in Brussels, and boy, we're going to get in trouble. Boy, we didn't comply with this thing they asked us to comply with. Now they're asking us for all this extra stuff. Boy, I am overwhelmed. Don't worry, Manfred, I'll help you out. What do you need? And so all of a sudden, this person on the other end of the phone feels like they're really helping out a fellow executive that's in trouble, that's under the gun, right? And so you're always introducing, I'm a high-level executive. That's one thing. And then you introduce the ticking clock, right? That there's some sort of time emergency. And so those two things, the power of being a high-level executive and the emergency, you put them together and you can get somebody that is willing to do a lot of things for you.
Yeah, and you had mentioned the superior role in finding someone at a lower level. There's a great book by Dale Carnegie called
Mm.
Games People Play. I think it's by Dale Carnegie. And he talks about games people play. And if you think about it, we're all playing games. I'm the boss, you're the employee. I'm the doctor, you're the student. Or I'm the teacher, you're the student. And if a fun exercise that everybody can do within the sound of my voice is just change when you find yourself in a conversation, you start asking the questions. You know what? I'll ask the questions here, and you can change who's responsible. You can change your tone. I'm curious, like, what are some other techniques? It seems like you've brushed on sense of humor. Sense of humor seems to be a great technique in order to change the pace of the conversation or gain trust on some level. At what point did you ever use sense of humor as a tool or a mechanism to extract information? And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there was always, a joke. I mean, I think one of the first ones was, somebody would say to you, how are you doing today? And I would always go, pretty good if I didn't have to work for a living,
Of course, gain
right?
trust. Beautiful. Yes.
And you so right away you're starting out that, boy, we're at the same company, and boy,
Yep.
man, this job is hard, it's stressful. Boy, I wish I didn't have to work. The person on the other end of the phone is, of course, they wish they didn't have to work.
Right.
Right. And so right away, you're just cracking a joke. I would always know if I was calling Cleveland, I would know if the Cleveland Browns had won
Right.
the day before, if there was some major accident on the whatever, again, that would be the research you would always do.
Right.
That's why I said 45 minutes to find out whatever I wanted. Part of that 45 minutes would be research, right? Where I would be figuring out who I wanted to call, where I wanted to say, who I wanted to say I was, where I was going to be located. And then once I figured out kind of those things, I would study the person I was calling, where they were located, what was going on in that area, what was going on with that company that day. Was their stock price up? Was their stock price
Right.
down? Did the CEO just get arrested for drunk driving? Anything that I could use so that I would be so informed that the person on the other end of the phone would go, they're not even thinking that this person is rusing me or possibly could be somebody they're not, because they know too much information about the company,
Yeah.
right? But like you said, these companies are so huge. There's so much information, even back in the day, that was public. You can read press releases right on their website. You can read their annual report right on their website. You can learn so much so that you really sound like you are an executive with the company.
Yeah. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. It seems to me like I worked at a Fortune 500 company, and it seems to me the general consensus is there's an us versus them. And if you get someone on the phone, or even someone that's an employee, maybe even lower middle management, they probably aren't talked to very nice by the C-suite executives. They're probably looked down upon as like, these people are just numbers over here. It doesn't even really matter. We're making decisions up here. You get that person on that phone, that person's more than willing to share some information with you on that level. Do you find that to be accurate?
Absolutely. And that's what we would utilize, is that exact
Yep.
thing. So, I'm now senior vice president or an executive vice president, and I'm calling someone that doesn't have any title,
Right.
or is the manager, right? They're levels below. And now they get this executive on the phone. And I would always say, I would be your best friend or your worst enemy, right? So in the beginning, I'm cracking jokes. I'm your best friend. I'm a major executive, but I'm a really nice guy. Help me out. And then if somebody would start giving me a hard time and they'd start questioning me, and maybe they were unsure and they got nervous, then I would start to try to put pressure on them,
Right.
utilizing, again, the power of persuasion that, look, this is going to be good for you to help me because I'm a major executive and you're not, you know. And some people wouldn't crack, some people wouldn't, and that
Nice.
was part of the job, And then we had this really fascinating thing where when somebody was not going to give us the information, because this job was hard, not everybody would give you
Right.
the information. Um, we would have this thing where this term we would use where we had to put that person to bed. We had to put that person to sleep. And what that meant was we've now got somebody that doesn't believe that we are who we say we are. And even more, oftentimes, those people were sort of up in arms, like, okay, you're pretending, I don't
Right.
believe this is not true. And you could hear that they were about to sound the alarm bell. They were going to send out emails, they were going to go to corporate security, they were going to go to their boss, and they were going to spread the word that someone was calling for this
Right.
specific piece of information, right? So my job now is to get them to not sound the alarm. How do you do that? So what I would do is they'd say, I don't believe a word you're saying, but I don't blah, 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 blah. I said, look, do you want me to send you an email that spells out everything I'm doing exactly? Yes, I want you to send me an email. Okay, I will send you an email. I will have it to you within an hour. It will have everything on it. It's going to come from a corporate email address. Yes, it's going to come from my corporate email address. I got one more fire I got to put out, but I'll get you that email within an hour, and it'll have everything in it, and you can calm down and know this is completely legitimate. And then the person would kind of go, oh, okay, well, yeah, I want that email. I want that, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to be giving you such a hard time, but, just send me an email. Everything will be fine. Don't worry. I'll send you that email, have it to you within an hour. Worst case, I'll have it to you by the end of the day. By the end of the day, worst case. Okay, well, look, thanks. Look, again, I'm sorry. I don't mean to give you such a hard time. No, it's fine. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. And by the way, just saw something, and I got another fire I got to put out. That email, if I don't get it to you by the end of the day, it'll be in your inbox first thing in the morning. First thing in the morning you'll have. Oh, okay, there's no rush, but Now what have I done? I bought myself the entire rest of the day to get this information, because obviously that email is never going to that person. They're never going to get an email, right?
Right.
But what I've done is they're thinking, oh, he's going to send me an email. This is a legitimate request. He's a busy executive, but I'm going to get it, and I'm going to know this was legit, right? And now I can move on to other people without this person telling anybody else in the corporation, right? And now I've got to get this information today.
Does it become like addicting on some level? I heard a great quote once that said, what you do sometimes, you do all the time. And if you get really good at extracting information from people, it seems like you would use all these techniques in like your personal life. Did you find that happening?
Yeah. And I talk about that in the book too, because it is very addicting.
Right.
And you realize that you could find out anything you want about your neighbors. You could find out anything you want about anyone.
Right.
And so I very early on recognized that was problematic, right? That was problematic. That if you're rusing your friends, and if you're rusing your family, and you're rusing your loved ones, that's not a road you want to go down. And so I really drew a line that the rusing was going to be for the job. And in my personal life, I had to really not utilize, that skill set, because it's just too dangerous.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some ways, you realize what you're capable of, and that can be scary.
Yes. Yeah.
However, I think it would also be incredibly effective, like in coaching actors, or as much as you can help people with pen testing, I bet you could really help people understand relationships or conflict. I'm sure these are all byproducts of understanding the ruse, is understanding human behavior.
Right. Well, you're reading people, right? You're reading
Yes.
people. And in the case of the ruse phone call, I could hear in your
Right.
voice when you answered the phone and you responded to me whether I was going to get information out of you or not. Could hear it. And a lot of times, if I heard in your voice that you were going to be tough, I wouldn't even give you my ruse, because it would be wasted, and then potentially you would sound the alarm. So I would very quickly get out of a call, wrong number, or, oh, I got another call, I got to call it, let me call you back. And I would, basically abort, because I could read that person's vocal inflections, that they were not going to be a good source, right? And then other times I could hear right away, this person's going to tell me anything that I want to know. And I'm here to tell you, for your audience, I'd say 9 out of 10 people, and that includes you, listener, you're not the one, 9 out of 10 of you would give me anything that I want to know if I called you.
It sounds to me to be a developed skill to be able to hear emotion in someone's voice. On some level, we know when we pair someone's linguistic abilities with their face, with their eyes, with their gestures, like we can kind of tell what their emotions is. But it does seem like a pretty incredible skill to listen to what someone says and understand where they are emotionally at the point in time you're talking to them. Like that seems like a pretty valuable skill.
I think so. I mean, we've been blessed with two ears and one mouth.
Right.
So I always think that, because I am a talker, but I really focus and force myself to listen at least as much as I speak, and ideally twice as much as I speak. Because you really want to make sure that in relationships, in friendships, in work relationships, that you're listening more than you're talking. Because people, first of all, people like to talk. People like to be heard. So if you're somebody that can listen to someone, right away you're going to get a friend.
Right.
Because now you're listening to someone.
Right.
And we all want to be heard, right? And so in the situation of the ruse phone call, if I'm listening to you and we do a little tangent about the sports team that lost the other day and we bemoan that team and I listen to you vent, well, after I've listened to you vent about the sports team that lost or listen to you vent about the difficulties in your job that day, which I would do all
Yeah.
the time, now you're my friend because I've listened to you and you feel heard. So now when I make a request to you, what are you going to do? You're going to help me.
Right. Yeah, I think it speaks to the role of empathy and persuasion. Like empathy is an incredible tool which I wish more people had, but it is sort of this skeleton key which unlocks trust in a way.
Yeah, and you made a good point earlier when you talked about, beleaguered middle management, lower
Yeah.
management people, right? That they're
Yeah.
working really hard. They're often doing two or three jobs. They're not respected. They're talked down to. And so you get somebody that calls them that is, in my case, pretending to be an executive who is interested in them, who
Yeah.
is, being empathetic with them. They just love that. They just love that. And so then they are willing to tell you anything. And that was the thing that was surprising to me and also quite sad
Yeah.
was how miserable most of these people are in their jobs, and how lonely. I had one woman say to me, um, I was calling her for information for many, many, many years. And we developed a sort of a friendship. And she's one of the main characters in the book. Her name is Zoe. And we developed this friendship. And at one point, she said to me, she said, "You're my favorite person at the firm." Now, we had never, ever met. We'd never, ever met. But she said I was her favorite person. Now, think about how sad that is, that her favorite person at the firm isn't really with the firm, right?
Yeah.
Isn't really who she thinks it is. It's all a ruse, but yet she's so lonely. The corporation is obviously not a great place to work. People are not being nice to her, at least. And her favorite person is a telephone buddy that she's never met. Yeah.
That's heartbreaking. She might as well have said, I hate everybody here and my job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's common. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
your listeners will have to respond to you however they respond to you and because I'd be interested to hear, from people about, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being miserable, 10 being happy, where do you sit at your corporation, at your job? Like, are you a 1? Are you a 10? I'd be very interested to hear where people are with that in America today.
Yeah, it's a great question. We'll put it to the listeners and we'll definitely get some feedback maybe a little bit later. There's an interesting book, another book called John Ronson wrote a book called The Psychopath Test. And in that book, he talks about the way in which leadership, especially at the high corporate level, self-select for psychopathy on some level. Like, do you have empathy? No, perfect. We're going to elevate you here. Are you willing to get rid of all of these 150 people? Yeah, no problem. Like, have you, in your personal opinion, or I don't know what you get into with the book, but I think you deal with some high level executives. Is there any truth to that particular claim in your opinion?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the like I said, the fact that individuals that I presented, stolen data to extract,
Right.
I call it extracted data. The fact that
Right.
I presented that to individuals that are then on CNBC talking about what a great corporate culture they have and da da da. And you just
Right.
realize the duplicity of these corporations, of these executives, and that they're willing to do anything and everything to promote the company stock price
Yep.
so that they're getting a bigger bonus, a higher salary, or just not getting fired because, these people have big jobs. These people are making, in many cases, forget about millions of dollars a year, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The C-level executives at publicly
Yep.
traded companies, the amount of money they make with their salary, their bonus, and then the stocks is incomprehensible.
We've touched on the topic of identity a little bit, and isn't it isn't it interesting that people believe they are what they do? Like on some level, that seems like such a negative thing to me. And I guess it doesn't have to be, but if you believe that you are the thing that you do, and we get so wrapped up in titles, I am this, therefore everyone should see me as this. Maybe you could speak to the idea of identity and titles in the workplace.
Well, you look, the title, fortunately or unfortunately, is such a big deal at a company because the first thing people will say in the business world is, I'm Bill Jones, Vice President of Tax,
Yeah.
or I'm Bill Jones, Senior Vice President of Tax, right? People are introducing themselves, when you're at an event or you're
Yeah.
meeting people, it's not just their name. It's not just I'm Bill or I'm Bill Jones. It's I'm Bill Jones and then their title and maybe even the company they work for. So
Right.
you right away know, oh, he's important,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to I'm just Bill, right? And and you see that a lot in corporate America is everybody, is introducing themselves. And if somebody does introduce themselves and they don't say a title, then they're probably one of those beleaguered lower management, middle management folks that are, doing two or three jobs and, not getting the credit for it, not getting the title for it, not getting the compensation for it. Right. Um, so yeah, it's kind of the title is a little bit like driving around in the in the Mercedes or the Lamborghini. It's the way to show off that you've made it. You're above. And that was one of the things. You know we haven't really talked a lot about the morality of what I did.
Yeah.
Because I was always conflicted by it. And I'm not justifying it, but the way I rationalized it, especially as a young guy, was, well, I need a job. I'm poor. I need a job. That was one. And the other thing was,
Right.
well, I'm just getting secrets from one company and giving them to another company. And then that results in people getting better jobs because they get stolen away. And,
Right.
all that stuff to rationalize it. But there was a third part of it, which was, I had a little bit of a resentment
Mm-hmm.
of these major executives making so much money. And so it was kind of, in these corporations making so much money. And so, there was a little bit of that too, because I paid my way through
Yeah.
the University of Pennsylvania, which is a very expensive and elite school. And I was surrounded by people that, went into the workplace and got huge jobs and made tons of money. And I was an actor not making tons of money. And I was kind of like, God, I mean, it seems like the things are a little bit out of balance here. Like these guys are making, $150 million a year, and I'm making, whatever, $50, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so that was another way I rationalized it was, what, I deserve a little piece of the corporate America pie, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that resentment, like I feel that resentment sometimes. I think most people do when you start thinking like, does that person really deserve that much money? But if you ask them,
Right.
and they'll be like, yeah, I'm not a judge or a jury, but yeah, I think we all kind of feel that resentment. I think it's kind of warranted on some level. Is that too much?
No, I think, look, I mean, look, we want people to be successful. We want businesses
Yes.
to be successful. We
Right.
want to support, but there's also the idea of giving back.
Right.
There's the idea of kind of sharing the wealth of you want, if you're the CEO of a company, you want your people to be well compensated. You want your people to be well provided for because you're well compensated and you're well provided for. It's
Yeah.
just common sense. but we see over and over, part of the way corporate executives move up and get paid more money is to, eliminate an entire division of a company
Yeah.
and lay off 1,800 people, you know what I mean? And things like that, that's where it starts to get problematic, and obviously I come from a business family, my,
Right. Right.
small business, so I'm a big believer in small business, but, big business sometimes forgets, the importance of honoring your workforce.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question. What I don't know if you have data for this, but was it was it more difficult, less difficult, or the same amount of difficulty to get information from a private company versus a public company?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yes.
So in over my years in rusing, we called all companies,
Okay.
small, medium, and large, public, private, all over the world, Russia, Japan, China, South America, you name it, we called it, right? And
Right.
some of the assignments we did, it was just incredible, what I was being asked to find out. Um, and I would say private companies are a little bit harder, generally because they're smaller,
Right.
and they have fewer locations, and the people know each other better, and
Right.
so therefore it is harder. But look, when my clients would come to me with a list of firms they wanted me to penetrate and the information they wanted at those firms, there would be public companies on there, there would be private companies on there. And my job was to get that information. And I'm here to tell you that 99.9% of the time I did.
You spoke a little bit about the morality of it, and has doing what you've done changed your idea of the concept of trust?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so because what trust is,
Right.
and I know what it is, and I knew when I was on the phone rusing people that was not, even though I was building trust
Right.
in a lot of ways.
Right.
They weren't the right ways, and we talked earlier about why I did what I did.
Right.
But yeah, I think we all know what we all know what at one point in the book, my child at the time, I think maybe they were 8, and they heard me on the phone. They heard me rusing, and they said,
Ooh.
Dad, are you a hacker? Or are you, blah, 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 I said, oh, no, no, no. I'm just getting information and, giving it from one firm to another firm, and it's helping people get better jobs. I went through my whole song and
Right.
dance of, and my kid said, but it's dishonest. And I said, you're right. It is. And that was kind of the moment when I said, I have to get out of this job. I have to stop doing this job. And that was kind of the beginning of extricating myself from from doing what I was doing. And I'll just tell you a funny story about,
Yeah, please.
when the book came out, one of the things that amazed me about the book, I mean, there were a lot of things that amazed me
Yeah.
about the book. Frank Abagnale giving me the most
Yeah.
loving blurb, recommending me to his speaking agency, all of these, that was just shocking. But the thing I found the funniest was that the book comes out. I write an expose of the world of corporate spying and corporate espionage. And I cannot tell you how many companies reached out to me and said, Robert, we read your book, or we listened to your book on Audible, whatever. We want to hire you to spy for us. And I said, come on, you do know I've outed myself as a spy. I
Right.
wouldn't be a very smart spy if I told everybody what I was doing and then went back and did it again. You know what I mean? It's like the bank robber that got away with the big heist, but can't stop robbing banks, and then they get caught and they go to jail.
Right.
I said, no, 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 no. But that was, and I think that just speaks to the corporations knew, these people that reached out knew what I did, knew that it was wrong, knew that it was, obviously morally and ethically dubious, but also illegal, and they didn't care. They do not care. These corporations do not care. They want the information. The C-level executives want to know anything and everything that they can about their rivals, and they're willing to pay a lot of money for it. And they don't care about any of the legal issues. They protect themselves. Like I said, when they hire me through a consulting firm, through multiple layers. They pay me through multiple layers. I shouldn't have been surprised by that, but I was.
Yeah. Yeah, I read I think on your book there's a recommendation from John Perkins too, which wrote the Economic Hitman, and it's fascinating to think about what goes on behind the scenes in the boardroom, or you know, you spoke a little bit about poaching particular salesmen, but I would imagine, did you ever have like the union or like the Teamsters try to call you to get information on accidents and injuries, or were you extracting any kind of information like that?
No, I never had that, and something I was surprised that I never was approached by any political
Ah,
organizations,
yeah,
because I really thought that the kind of rusing we did was ideal to find out stuff for political campaigns, right?
right.
Um, and I don't think I would have done that because again, that's like a, because now you're finding out who's cheating on their spouse or who's got a drug
Dark.
problem, or, right? Those things, which really it starts to get even more sordid. So I didn't really want to do that, but I was surprised I never heard from anybody saying, "Hey, will you consider this?" Because obviously that's out there, right? I mean, political campaigns are really, and I don't know who they're hiring for that, but those people are willing to get really down and dirty and find out the most salacious information that they can about a political candidate.
Yeah. It's interesting, when you talk about doing the ruse and then your kid hearing, the image of a stone thrown into a quiet, calm pond comes to mind. Those ripples radiate outwards on some level. Was it
Yeah.
difficult to sort of, find your way back into like, okay, I'm done doing this stuff now, not, to get the call back to a different kind of life? Like, how did you manage that?
I didn't. I had a like, I didn't. I had like I won't say I had an emotional breakdown, but I definitely had a period of depression where, not that I was depressed not to do this job anymore, but it was just like, okay, well, what am I doing now? And
Right.
at one point, I wrote one day I was sitting there and this voice kind of came to me, and I wrote a suicide note. Now it wasn't
Whoa.
me. Yeah, yeah, but it wasn't me writing the suicide note.
Mm,
It was this voice of this character that came through to me, and all of a sudden, around this character, I wrote a book. I had been an English major in college before I became an actor, and I showed it to a couple of old acting friends, and they said, "Wow, this is pretty good. You should write. You should write more." And that was the beginning of me starting to write. I started taking some writing classes. To my surprise, I started writing short stories. They were getting
yeah.
published in magazines. I started writing articles for newspapers and magazines. They were getting published, and I was kind of like, whoa. And one day I was at a writers' conference, and I wrote a little something about rusing, about this corporate spying thing, and people freaked out, and they said, "Oh my God, like we didn't know corporate spies existed. We didn't know you did this." They said, "You got to write a book about this." And that was the impetus for writing the book. I had to wait until the statute of
Mm,
limitations expired for any crimes that I may or may not have committed. But once that statute, passed, which was 10 years, then, I was able to publish the book and kind of, tell the tales.
yeah. Have you received, did you ever get caught? Never ever catch you?
Uh, you know, I don't want to spoil the book for the
Right, right. I
readers.
don't, yeah, yeah. Please
Yeah,
don't.
or listeners. But yeah, I mean, it was Frank Abagnale-ish. Let me just say that. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of hot water, a lot of running and hiding.
Yeah, it sounds like a total cat and mouse game where you're constantly trying to stay one step ahead, and enthralling and exciting, and the chase and acquiring information, and being part of this thing that is this hot commodity that's sort of secretive, and on some level it's secret agent ish.
Yeah, and you would get people, forget about angry. You
Right.
would have executives at companies furious, especially the head of legal, right? The
Right.
general counsel, that someone, they're trying to find out who it is, has penetrated their firm and has gotten XYZ information. And, so that's where it gets into like the catch me if you can, because now
Right.
you've got the head of legal at a major firm with 30 attorneys on staff and corporate security people and a huge budget. Um, and they're like, we're going to find this guy. We're going to find this guy and we're going to get this guy. And I'm not going to say anything more about
Right,
it.
right, right. Don't I like that? That to me is so salacious and seductive in a way. It's like you guys spend $20 million on security, and I just talked to your receptionist and got everything. What now?
Exactly.
That's so awesome.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
in a executive type of awesome. I don't know. It's awesome to me to think that every individual is so powerful, and this idea of human connection may be longing in so many people that if we just reach out and connect with people, we can really get the ideas out there and have a better life. And it also speaks to the sadness out there, man, of people living unfulfilled lives on some level. Man, what a roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean, it was a roller coaster, and I'm glad I'm kind of off of it.
Yeah, of
And
course.
but it's been fun reliving it. Not only writing the book, but then doing shows like this where people, everybody finds a different part of the book interesting because the book's kind of like two books. It's a Hollywood
Yeah,
tell-all, which we didn't really get into because
right.
I was working with Al Pacino and Paul Newman and George Clooney and O.J. Simpson and all of these, major people. There's kind of a
Right.
Forrest Gump quality. I'm like with O.J. Right before the murders, I'm getting hit on by Kevin Spacey. Like all of these crazy stories. While I'm a corporate spy, making all this money, being hunted, so, and then of course trying to have a personal life. So yeah, so it's kind of two books, and it kind of goes back and forth between Hollywood, Wall Street, Hollywood, Wall Street. So I think it's fun. I hope people like it.
Yeah, I think people will definitely enjoy it. And I think if people want to hear about Kevin Spacey hitting on you or running with OJ, they should be definitely checking out this book. I don't want to dive too deep into some of the incredible stuff on there. Did you find there was a lot of crossover between some of the executive attitudes and the actors in Hollywood?
Not the actors in Hollywood, but the producers and
Mm,
executive
okay,
producers, studio people,
right.
very similar attitudes. You know, um, yeah. I mean, there's this thing where they're not really going to be nice to you. They're
Right.
not going to be kind to you unless they think you have something to offer them. Um, and I would like to live in a world where people are nice first
Yeah.
without me having to prove that I'm worthy of your kindness. That we lead with kindness.
You know, it's interesting to see where when you began using the ruse or you began using the telephone as a means of communication. There's a lot of, I think it kind of echoes today. Now there's a lot of talk about people in a virtual world may not be communicating as well as in a room with somebody. But you were using the phone to foster real deep connections with people. Do you have any thoughts on the way we're communicating today using the lessons that you learned in the past?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're not communicating today, and people are isolated.
Yeah.
I think we're just learning now how. Look, this invention, the internet, this call, how we're seeing each other, different places, how other people all over the world are watching your show, incredible, unbelievable, mind-boggling, right? But there's
Yeah.
also a downside to this technology, and I think that it gets very easy. You see it when you're out in public. You'll see a family sitting they're out to dinner, four people, and they're sitting there, and everybody's on their phone, right? Rather than interacting with each other, right? And I think the phone, this technology is unbelievably addictive. I think people are just now really starting to address that, and you're finally seeing schools recognize how addictive these phones are and how detrimental it is to young people and their development and their education. And many schools now are saying, phones aren't allowed, which I think is fantastic. I know my kid is, on the phone 24/7. I know, my nephews are playing video games all night long until 3 in the morning,
Yeah.
and then they're going to school and they're not doing as well in school because they've been up to 3 in the, and for parents, it's an incredibly hard thing to do because, in one sense, you want your kid to have a phone so you can reach out to them and you can contact them in an emergency, and but so it's a real, it's sort of a mess, and I think it has inhibited, especially the younger generation, in their ability to connect with people.
Yeah. It's really easy to send an email and not have to face the consequences of the felt presence of the other, and
Mm.
so I do hope that we can move forward in relationships. But I think that we have a real opportunity to create better relationships. And I think a lot of the work that you did sheds light on the psychology of relationships, the psychology of empathy. And I think you've really done a lot of interesting things to help people understand relationships and stuff like that. But Robert, as we're coming up on this hour right here, what do you got coming up, man? What are you excited about? Where can people find you? What's going on?
Oh, well, I mean, look, people can find me on my website. It's just my
Right.
name, robertkerbeck.com. And I joke, but it's also true. I said, look, if anybody out there wants to pivot to a career in corporate spying, they're welcome to reach out. I'll give them some tips. There's a ton of work for spies out there. I'm out of the
Nice.
game.
Right.
But the thing I'm most excited about is that, I got a couple of new books I'm working on, and Ruse is in development for a TV series, which is pretty far along, and very exciting, that the book may come to become a limited series, which is something that I never ever would have thought, like, in a million years. I mean, even when I was writing the book, I never thought, like, oh, somebody's going to make this into a TV show. Like, but the fact that that is in process is like I said, I just can't believe it, and I'm really excited, and fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Aren't you? I think I read somewhere that you're spotlighting some local authors in your area too, hoping to get shine some light onto their books.
Oh yeah, so I run a literary salon at Soho House Malibu. Again, if any of your listeners are in the LA area, they're more than welcome to reach out. I'll have them come as my guests. And the authors that I've had come, I had John Densmore, the drummer for the Doors.
Yeah.
I had Dennis Lehane, who wrote Mystic River and Shutter Island and Gone Baby Gone. I had Serge Tankian, the lead singer for System of a Down. I mean, as a matter of fact, tonight I have Laura Dave, who wrote The Last Thing He Told Me, which is an Apple series with Jennifer Garner. So, I've just had these amazing authors, and it's a real labor of love. I get to interview them and talk about their books, just like you're doing with me now. I do that in person with the ocean right next to me.
It's so beautiful. John Densmore from the Doors. That sounds like an amazing conversation. What did you guys talk about?
He wrote a memoir, and his memoir
Okay.
was about the friction. Obviously Jim Morrison died, from alcoholism very young, and the other two members of the band, they wanted to sell the music for commercials, and John felt like that was commercializing the Doors history and the Doors. He didn't want a Doors song for a car commercial. He had no problem with them using, right? Yeah, he had no problem with them using the music in movies, because the
Right.
Doors were in Apocalypse Now, their music, or on TV shows, like in artistic venues. But he just didn't
Right.
want, he felt like they were making so much money from the Doors catalog, and none of them really needed any money. They were all rich. But the other two members wanted to do that, and they sued John Densmore. And they went to court, and they had this huge, amazing trial, which John documents in the book. And eventually John won the trial, and proved that the Doors' original agreement was that the music would not be used in commercials. and it's just a fascinating book, and he's a fascinating guy. And so again, that's the kind of conversation that I'm having with these salons.
It sounds amazing. How are you? Are you okay on time? I had a couple more questions, but you've already been really generous with your time. Do you have
Sure,
time for
yeah. I
another
mean, look,
question? Okay.
if your
Okay.
audience isn't bored of me,
Yeah, no, not at all. Okay, I just wanted to make sure because sometimes I always want to be thankful for the people. I I think we're beginning to touch upon this idea of storytelling on some level. You as a
yeah.
storyteller, you've lived a story. You wrote a book about a story, and now you have this other dimension where you're interviewing other storytellers. Can you talk about the power of storytelling, like why it's so sort of contagious and why it's so captivating and why you find yourself in the midst of it right now?
Well, first of all, the thing about a story is it's a usually a tale of someone else, right?
Yeah.
It's something you haven't ever experienced. It's something you don't know about. One of my authors recently was a young woman named Sophia Sinclair. She's from Jamaica, and she wrote this story about growing up as a child with a father who was a Rastafarian. Now, I did not know anything. I mean, the only thing that most of us know about Rastafarian is Bob Marley, right? And
Right.
that's all we really know, right? And I didn't understand, was it a religion? Was it a movement? Was it, what is being a Rastafarian, and how, and so that book was fascinating to read. Her book, it's How to Say Babylon, by Sophia Sinclair. And just the opportunity to learn, like, so much about that. And the same thing with John Densmore, to learn so much about this interplay between the band members for all of these years, and the struggles and the issue of, artistic integrity and compromise and commercialism. And, so, you get these fascinating authors telling these fascinating stories, because they're, and even if it's those were obviously nonfiction, but even if it's a fiction book, because tonight I have Laura Dave, who wrote The Last Thing He Told Me, and this is fiction, and it's a thriller and suspense and twists and turns. But there's still things in there that you want to know, like, how did you come up with that? Like,
Yeah.
how did you figure that out, and how did you decide to tell the story that way, and how did you pull it off? So it really is enjoyable for me to get to interview these people and ask those questions.
It's almost like a different dimension. It seems like when you get to be part of a story, you know what it is? It almost seems like a rite of passage on some level. You know what I mean by that? When you look back into like a ceremony, a rite of passage, like a young man gets to watch his older brother go through a ceremony to become a man. The older brother gets to go through the ceremony. The father gets to see his son go through it. The grandfather gets to see many generations happening to it. And on some level, it sounds to me like that's the phase of what we're in. Like, you've already told your story about how you had this incredible story that happened, and now you're making this transition into being the person that facilitates the story. What do you think that in the Western world we sort of have gotten away from this rite of passage in its own story? I know that's kind of I didn't really phrase that question the right way, but in the Western world, it seems like we suffer from an absence of rites of passage, and all these stories you're telling seem to me to be rites of passage in some way. What do you think about that?
Well, I love that idea. There's, like, you're sort of touching on mentoring there. And
Yes,
so,
yes.
when I was a young actor, and this is a chapter in the book, I
Okay.
was being directed in a play at the Actor Studio in New York by this guy named James Lipton.
Right.
And as you may recall, James Lipton created this TV series inside the Actor Studio, which ran on Bravo, was a huge
Yep.
hit, 20 years, won Emmy Awards, and he interviewed everyone, Al Pacino, Paul
Yeah.
Newman, Julia Roberts, Bradley Cooper, on and on and on, right? I was with James when he first came up with that idea. And I was the lead in the play he was directing. So we spent a lot of time together. And one day we were sitting backstage, and he said, Robert, I have this idea for a show. Let me tell it to you. Do you think this would be an interesting show? And he said, my idea is I interview actors about pivotal moments in American movie history. Do you think people would be interested in that? I said, James, people would love that, right?
Yeah.
People would love
Yeah.
it. that's a great idea. You should do something with that. And at the time, he didn't really know anybody at the actor studio. And I was a member of the actor studio. And he said, can you introduce me to Paul Newman? Because if I could get Paul Newman to sign on and be my first guest, that would give me some credibility and blah, blah, blah. So long story short, and again, I don't want to spoil the book, that connection happened. Paul Newman was James' first guest. And that gave the show some wind because people wanted to hear Paul Newman talk about his movie roles and how he prepared and what he was thinking, and obviously the rest is history. So when I came up with this idea with the literary salon, it wasn't really me coming up with the idea. It was like, I'm just going to replicate what James Lipton taught me, and I'm going to do the same thing, but with authors, at Soho House, Malibu by the ocean. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to ask the same questions, like, how did you come up with this idea for the book? Or what were you thinking, John Densmore, when your bandmates, when you got the packet, the giant document from the lawyers that your bandmates were suing you? Like, what was your first thought in that moment, So those are the kind of things that, people are like, that's fascinating. The two of the members of the Doors are suing the other member of the Doors, and they've sued him for like $30 million. Like he was going to go bankrupt if he lost that suit, and he fought it all the way for years, and he won. So to be able to have conversations like that, it's just,
What's your it sounds to me there's like an Ariadne thread that runs through so many of the stories we're talking about. And it's this one of relationships. It's this one of overcoming adversity. Like, what are some of the stories that really call to you? Is it the hero's journey, or is it this, call to beat corruption? Or what about you personally? What are the stories that call to you?
Again, I think what I love to read and watch are books and programs that are showing me something that I haven't seen before. Whether it's like I said, with Sophia Sinclair, it was
Right.
Jamaica and this Rastafarian culture, which was fascinating.
Right.
And then of course, like with John Densmore, going inside this lawsuit about the band, and then it went all the way back to the beginning in the history, things like that. You're just like, this is just incredible, to read this, and the same thing with television and films. I want to see a world, that I haven't seen before, or individuals that I haven't seen before, or, so, that's what I look for, is something that is fresh, because that's always exciting so, I mean, that's nothing against, your good old, I don't know, conventional rom-com, or, I'm not putting those other things down. It's just, in general, those things don't appeal to me.
Do you find that getting to read other people's stories, like you read their book, that the world you make up in your own mind usually exceeds the world that you see in the media? You know what I mean? Like sometimes they'll make a movie based on a book, and you watch the movie, like, that's a good movie, but I sort of like the vision I had in my head more.
Yeah, well, look, almost anything that you see on television has a sort of hyper realism. So it's not realistic. There's like an extra 10% added or 20% added, because the powers that be don't think you're going to sit through if it's just kind of realistic. So the idea of like a realistic TV show or a realistic movie, it doesn't really exist that much anymore. Everything, it's like, remember the movie Spinal Tap? My amp goes to 11. So all the TV shows and the movies are turned up to 11.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the mental picture that we paint for ourselves when we read the work of someone else, and if perhaps that skill is atrophied because of so much that has gone out there. What do you think? It is atrophied in some level because maybe there's less people reading?
I do think that. I mean, one of the things that's happened with this boom in high quality television, which I enjoy as much as anybody else.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things is a lot of writers have gone into writing for TV, and in the past they would have been writing books, and they're not writing books now. So that is a little bit of a shame, because I don't know, I mean, at the end of the day, TV shows kind of come and go, and there are some TV shows we remember for 50 years, but they're very few. But books kind of stick around, because when you buy a
Yeah.
book, generally, you buy a book and you keep it and you put it on your mantle or you put it in your bookshelf, and so it seems to me that books have a little bit of a longer life than kind of a movie or a TV show, but that might just be me.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Do you have any books that like you keep on your bookshelf that you sort of return to from time to time? Like sometimes I have over there, if I'm looking at mine, I have like I got the Carl Jung book and a couple books that people had sent me, but I find myself always going back to some Terrence McKenna books or just some obscure authors sometimes that really inspire me. Who are some books or some authors that you return to be inspired?
Well, I mean, I go back to like, Cormac McCarthy, No Country for Old Men, The Road. I mean, those are books you can go back to and be freaked out by them over and
Yeah.
over because they're so good, they're so intense. So, that's one that I really like. But in general, because I have this literary salon and I'm getting sent books
Yeah.
all the time, I'm constantly reading new books. So, unfortunately, I don't have as much time to go back and read old books because I've got a giant stack of new books, which I love reading.
Do you see, because people are sending you new books and you're talking to all these fascinating, cool people, do you see any trends or things that you see possibly as trends as our culture moving forward?
Well, there are a lot of memoirs. There are a lot of people writing memoirs, and there are a lot of memoirs written by pretty darn famous people that nobody reads. And I'm going to have to wrap it up soon because I think
Sure.
my wife's got some construction people coming to the house, which I did not know
Got it.
about. But I'll tell you a funny story. So I'm at Soho
Okay.
House Malibu. Soho House Malibu, there's celebrities running around, and I'm about to do my salon upstairs. And so people are coming up to me and they're saying hi. And this guy sees me and he sees I'm kind of the center of attention because I'm hosting the salon. And he comes over and he's like, Who are you? Who the hell are you? Because I'm really nobody. But he looks very familiar. And he's like, Who are you? Like, I don't know you, but you should know me. And I'm looking at him and he looks so familiar and his voice is so familiar. And all of a sudden I realize it's Steve Gutenberg. You remember Steve Gutenberg? Like he was an actor, Three Men and a
Yeah.
Baby. And he was kind of like a big,
Yep.
a police
Yeah.
academy.
Yep.
I think, right. He was kind of a big
Yeah.
star at one point. And he introduces himself and I introduce myself and then he goes, I've got a memoir. So Steve Gutenberg's written a memoir now. He wanted me to have a salon for him. And so that's my point, is that there are a lot of people now writing memoirs. So that's kind of one of the big trends, is that everyone is writing a memoir. Most of them don't get read even by people like Steve Gutenberg. I mean, I don't think he sold very many copies of his book, but everybody's writing memoirs. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if he's related to the printing press, the Gutenberg press. Anyways, my mind will just keep racing. Robert, fascinating conversation. I think everybody within the sound of my voice, go down, check out the book Ruse. It's all about being a corporate spy. Robert said, reach out to him if you want to learn more about what it takes to be a corporate spy. I think it's fascinating information. And I think that the story, people will be blown away by. We only covered a little bit of it. It's out now. You can buy it on Amazon. It's on Audible. The book is called Ruse. Go down, check it out. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a beautiful day. Yep, that's it. Thank you so much, Robert, for everything. Have a wonderful day.
thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.